Well, it is great to have Patrick with us. There's the missions committee met last night at the Love's house, and it was a very nice evening. But Patrick got to share with us some things last night, and I got to tell you, it opened up my eyes, and it even made me begin to think. And we have been anticipating this day. We've been anticipating this moment of when you were able to come and to share with us what God has laid on your heart. So as he comes and shares, may we be in prayer. May we be attentive to the words that he has for us. And may it just open up our lives and our hearts unto what he has to share with us. So Patrick, God bless you. We continue to pray for you and thank you. And it was great meeting you. I know this is the first time I met you, but bless you. And I'm excited for what God is doing in your life. And I'm so thankful for what he brought you from to what he's doing today. That makes me excited as a pastor and as a child of God. So God bless you. Come on and share with us as the Lord's laid on your heart.
Morning. It's great to be back. I'm sorry my wife, Jamie, can't be here. She's the one that makes sure I'm organized, so I don't know if my belt is on backwards or, things are a mess. It's very possible. But Jamie and Marco and I would just love to thank you for the support that you've given us over the years. And it has really paid off. The Lord has really blessed us, both in China and now in Europe and the Middle East. And we really couldn't do it without you. I mean, yesterday with the missions committee, I shared about some of the difficult times that we've had. And a lot of times when you go out as a missionary, people will say, yeah, we're praying for you, and we need your prayers, and all of that kind of stuff. But you don't know how much you mean that until you've been in the battle for a while. Now, once you've been out there on the mission field and you can genuinely feel the spiritual attacks and the discouragement, knowing churches are praying for you and believe in you makes all the difference in the world. Sometimes we'll get note cards from a church, and it's often on the darkest day we're experiencing, and it tells you you're not alone. There's a family behind you back in America that believes in you. And so we don't take these churches for granted that support us. We don't take you for granted. And we're just so appreciative of what you do. I want to share with you this morning a little bit about what we are doing in a presentation that is entitled that Fear is the Enemy of Mission. And so I want to begin by looking at Luke chapter 22, if you have your Bibles. It's Luke 22, verse 39 through 45. 39 through 45. Nothing makes me more thirsty than watching someone giving a speech drinking water. Like, I don't even like water, but I see someone up here and I go, that looks really good right about now. I don't know what that is. Verse 39 says, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing to take this cup from me, yet not my will be done, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. But when he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. And he said, "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. And said, "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." I want to talk about fear. One of the things that's amazing about the Bible is that it is so honest about the Bible characters. I mean, we see the problems of Noah. We see Moses' weaknesses. We see King David's weaknesses. We see how Solomon was the wisest man in the world, but he had these horrible weaknesses. The Bible's unique amongst world religions in that it shows us the bad parts, the difficult parts, the human parts of our Bible heroes. That is really weird. That is not what you would ordinarily see in Buddhist texts, Hindu texts, Muslim texts. It's very unusual. And it's so transparent, the Bible is so transparent that we actually get to this moment where Jesus is genuinely afraid and doesn't want to go through what God is calling him to do. I love that about the Bible. I love that it is so honest about not just our weaknesses, but the weaknesses of these Bible heroes. And even Jesus has this moment of vulnerability. And you know, Jesus had every right to be afraid because in the time when Jesus lived, it was not uncommon to walk down the street and actually see people crucified on crosses. Okay, so if you live in a little village or a town where you actually walk down the street and every once in a while you see someone hanging on a cross, that doesn't exactly fill your heart with peace. You know, it says you were occupied by an army. This could be you. Torture is real. And so when Jesus has this moment of anxiety and fear, it is completely understandable. But what's great about the scripture is that as that happens, Jesus makes it clear that he is going to trust God in his fear, and that fear is the enemy of mission. Fear is the enemy of mission. You know, today we see so many things to be afraid of on the news. We had the Ebola outbreak recently. We have another one at the UCLA Medical School that we read about this week. We've seen an abundance of plane crashes, some under very mysterious circumstances, in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. We have ISIS on the news all the time, beheading people, crucifying people, killing and crucifying children, persecuting Christians. We see the Boko Haram people in Africa abducting women, turning them into slaves. As you turn on the news, there are many reasons to be afraid right now. And it makes us feel like the world is a scary place, like anything horrible could happen at any moment. And so there is this sense of fear, but fear is the enemy of mission. This is our family in the Middle East. That's Ken and Kelly Oldham. I don't know if you know them. They're in their third year working for our ministry team, Three Worlds. That's Grace, Titus, and Zeke, their children. And they are located in the country of Egypt and work also in the country of Lebanon. Now, recently we had a bit of a crisis with them. They had moved to Egypt to be missionaries, and there was a coup that introduced a militant Islamic president to the country. So suddenly, they were living in a country dominated by Muslim fanatics. And there they were. And they've got their small kids there. And I don't know how many of you would want to go live in a Muslim country right now. Probably not too many of you. And how many of you would want to take your 3 small children to live in a Muslim country having a revolution? Probably not too many of you. But that is what they feel the Lord called them to do. So we actually had a bit of a crisis with them because It turned out that their children were at a very inexpensive school getting their education, but that school was located between 3 mosques. There were protests going on all the time. There was only one emergency exit door. There was no security. And it was in a neighborhood where if there were problems or if Muslims had taken over the school or attacked it, the parents would not have been able to get to it. So we had a huge choice that we had to face. What do we do about these kids? Do we leave them in this very dangerous school? Do we move them to a school that is very high security, much better school? It's actually the collection point for the U.S. Marines in case the country goes up in flames. That is where the Americans would go, and they would be rescued from the school compound because it's a big compound. Or do we pull the family out of the Middle East because it's too dangerous? Well, these are the hardest decisions that we have to make as regional coordinators for Europe and Middle East, especially when you look at the faces of those children and you say, do you really want them in a country that's experiencing a Muslim takeover? So we had 3 decisions. One was to leave them in the dangerous school, which was going to be much cheaper. 2 was to put them in the high security school, which was going to be extremely expensive. Or 3 was to just pull them out of their ministry in the Middle East. And so we weighed this very heavily. But all of us felt like, you know what? The Lord has called them there for this moment in history. They are the ones that God chose. They are unbelievable missionaries. They have incredible skills. Their ministries are flourishing. So we decided we're going to leave them there, but we're going to put them in the expensive, safe school. And in order to do that, it was going to cost us tens of thousands of dollars. Money we didn't have. But we went out on a leap of faith. We said, God, we will trust you with the lives of our missionaries and their kids, even though we know it's risky, if you can help us provide the funds for the kids to go to the more expensive, safer school. And so that's what we did. That's where the kids have been. They're doing fantastic. And then there was a counter coup that ushered in a new government a year later. And so things are safer day to day, but the terrorists are now wanting to kill the new president. And the amount of bombings that are going on in their city, Cairo, is growing every day. And ISIS is now in Egypt, in the Sinai Peninsula. So they're not out of danger, but what they did understand was what Jesus understands, which is that fear is the enemy of mission. This is Trafficking Sunday for the Church of God as we try to focus on the battle against sexual slavery. And I want to make it clear that, fear is a natural response. We are all programmed, our bodies are programmed to experience fear. I mean, if you are crossing the street and a bus is coming and you miscalculate, you will get a surge of adrenaline and fear that will help your body get across the street in time. In fact, even before your brain decides to be afraid, your body will choose to be afraid. So fear is a very real, helpful, protective mechanism. But fear can prevent you from experiencing God. It can prevent you from experiencing God. Rhonda is part of our team in Berlin, and there she is in the middle. She's very sweet and angelic. She's the cutest woman ever. She has a very nice, soft voice. Everybody comments on her eyes that just kind of radiate the love of Jesus. She's a very sweet, tender-hearted woman. But she works on the street with prostitutes. Many of them have been trapped into sexual slavery. And she works at a cafe. And these are women that are controlled by pimps, by men who are monitoring everything they do. And she runs a cafe where the women can get off the streets, get some food, get a snack, some coffee or hot chocolate. They can pray with someone. They can get some counseling advice. or they can just talk with each other, but there's no men allowed, and it's just a refuge for those women, that little cafe. And Rhonda runs that place, and every once in a while, one of these dangerous men who runs the sex trafficking networks will want to come into the cafe. But Rhonda will get there. Gentle, sweet, cute Rhonda will get in front of that man, and she will say, "You are not coming into this cafe. This cafe is holy ground." And they never cross that line. Rhonda has been concerned because the cafe is a great shelter for women temporarily, but what about these women that we have that are wanting to escape slavery? They're wanting to go back to their home countries. They're wanting to get away from these men that abuse them and rape them and do all sorts of things to them. They're wanting to get out of the life. What do we do there? Well, in our city of Berlin, we have 4 million people. There's not a single shelter for these women to escape to be relocated and to be trained with job skills. So Rhonda had a dream. She had a dream, what if we were to launch a new ministry that was a transition home for these women, where we would interview them, we would get them away from the dangerous people, we would then put them in a shelter that's hidden where they can't be found before getting them jobs or relocating them to their countries. So this was a big, ambitious dream, huge dream. It's going to involve a lot of money. It's going to involve registering with the government in Germany. It's going to involve social workers. It's going to involve staff, finding a building that's big enough to host women as a shelter. It was a huge dream. Well, Rhonda was invited to share about this dream in Atlanta with other Church of God people fighting sexual slavery. And they had a little conference in Atlanta. The conference was over. It was a very rainy day. And Rhonda was tired of kind of being cooped up in the hotel. So she decided, I think I'm just going to, even though it's a rainy day, I think I'm just going to go outside and I'm going to take a walk and just get out of this little room. Ooh, so refreshing. I have to be careful when I visit the Russian Church of God because it could be vodka. Luckily, there was no moonshine in here. Appellation. I know where I am, folks. So she went outside, and she's walking down the street, and there's this homeless man, clearly a homeless man, long beard, scraggly clothes, just kind of walking along, and not many people were out on the street. And this man comes up to her and he says, "Hey, lady, I like your bag." And she had like a little bag that she was carrying. And she said, "Oh, well, thank you. Thanks. I really like it too. It's very useful." And then she goes up to him and she says, "Hi, I'm Rhonda. What's your name?" Because that's Rhonda. She's just so cute. And the man says, "You shook my hand. Nobody shakes my hand." And she said, "Well, why wouldn't I?" She said, "Well, tell me about you. I'd like to get to know you." And he said, "Oh, well, I'm homeless and I live under a bridge right down the street. And I spend my time under that bridge and I basically just preach to people about Jesus. That's what I do. I just preach about Jesus." And she said, "Wow, well, that's really interesting because I'm a missionary." And then this homeless man said to her, "Yeah, you're a missionary. And the Lord told me that for the last year, you have been praying about having a shelter for women. And the Lord told me that this dream of yours that you've been praying to him about is going to come to pass. And you're not going to have to worry about the money. The money is going to be there. You're going to have a shelter. It's going to be in a red brick building, and it's going to have 124 beds." And Rhonda said, how could you possibly have known that? This is unbelievable. That's exactly why I'm here, etc. I mean, it was just an amazing moment. Rhonda learned a little bit more about the guy. She learned that he had no place to stay that night and no meal. But there was a shelter just down the street that for $24 he could get a bed and a meal and stay there for 24 hours. And so she said, what if I go to the ATM and I give you the money and you can go stay there and get warm and have a meal today? And he said, really? You would do that for me? And she said, well, of course I'd do that for you. Let's go now. And so they went across the street to an ATM, arm in arm. Rhonda, very classy-looking woman, and this homeless guy. And people were looking at them on the street. What are these two people doing together? She went and she gave them the money, and they parted ways. Well, she was so excited by this amazing kind of vision that she went and talked to Andy Odell, who works the church on the street in Atlanta. He knows all the homeless people there. He's right downtown dealing with all of them. He's been there for years. And she said, you'll never guess what happened, Andy. She told him the whole story that I just told you. She told him about this man who preaches under the bridge. And Andy Odell said to her, you know, I know everybody in this area who is homeless. I know everybody. And I have no idea who you are talking about. Since that meeting, the speed at which we have been able to launch this new ministry, which is called Pink Door, is incredible. An incredible team has been assembled to launch it. We were registered by the government of Germany as a nonprofit in November. We have people in German parliament that are in support of this. We have a mayor in a suburb of Berlin who has invited us to build it and have it, the shelter, in his suburb, and wants to make it happen. And just yesterday, I told Rhonda that we got a $36,000 gift just yesterday from someone. And so the speed at which this is taking off is amazing, but it was scary when we all think about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to do right now to launch this thing in October. It's overwhelming. There's a million reasons to be scared. But fear is the enemy of mission. Fear is the enemy of mission. I just recently wrote a new book that I am selling out there. By the way, after this, I'll be out there. We have a little display. You can see pictures of our team and some of our national leaders. And then I do have some books for sale. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of change with me. My wife takes care of that, and she's not here, so I messed that one up. But anyway, this newest book is called In God We Trust, A Challenge to American Evangelicals. And the reason why I wrote it is because after living outside of the United States for 14 or 15 years, I come back from time to time to the U.S., country that I love. But as I come back to the United States, I really feel like the country has been seized by a spirit of fear. Seized by a spirit of fear. And the thing that saddens me the most is kind of leading the charge on the spirit of fear scale, or American evangelical Christians. I hear the language and the spirit of fear from my evangelical American friends all the time. And it disturbs me. I don't think that that's what God is asking us to do. This is something that is a problem for the United States. You know, my son Marco grew up in Hong Kong and he grew up in Germany, and he is not really an American. And so this is his first time really experiencing American culture. And we've been living in Indiana. We're going to be there for a year, and then we leave in July. So he's got, a few more months of school, and then we're leaving. And so he's been here in the United States, and it didn't take him very long to really feel weird in America. And some of the things that he said, he had a lot of comments about America, which were interesting to us because, of course, we know the United States, but for him it's all new. So he thought there were just a lot of interesting observations he had. But one of the things that he was so surprised by was how violent television is in the United States. It just looks absolutely obsessed with violence and bad things happening. Not only are there, tons of news stories about all sorts of awful things and abductions and kids missing and murders and shootings, but even our entertainment shows are all about violence and horrible things happening. So on the commercials, he would see, Law and Order, and then there's Law and Order SUV, and then there's Law and Order Express, and then there's Law and Order Gluten-Free. It's and then there's CSI, right? There's CSI Miami, CSI New York, CSI Las Vegas, CSI Greenville. It goes on, and then you have NCIS, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The news stories are constantly telling you about awful, awful things. And then the international news is even worse. Well, my son was kind of like, what kind of country did you guys bring me to? Everybody's murdering everybody. Everybody's killing everybody. It's nonstop violence. What kind of place is this country? So I had to explain to him, well, see, Marco, there's something about the Americans. The Americans are, I don't know how to put this, but they're kind of drama queens. And they're really obsessed with violence and thinking that they've never been worse than right now. So I said, Marco, crime is as low today as it has been since gas was 42 cents a gallon. In fact, when I started driving, gas was 82 cents a gallon. So crime has been on a decline even longer than that and is lower. It's been in a constant decline since 1993. The rate of teen abortions and pregnancies is as low as it's ever been. Drug use is actually way down overall in the United States. Alcoholism peaked in 1980. Driving drunk accidents peaked in 1984. Smoking peaked in 1900. And alcoholism in general in the United States peaked in 1830. The most dangerous time to be a police officer in the United States was 1930. And it's only been getting safer ever since. The chances of you dying in a terrorist attack, you're twice as more likely to die slipping in your bathtub than being killed by a terrorist or being hit by lightning twice in a row. Yet that is not the impression you get living in the United States, as my son has found out. Instead, we are obsessed with fear. And one of the things I write about in this new book is that from the very, very, very beginning of the establishment of the United States, we have been obsessed with the apocalypse. We've been obsessed with the end of the world. There was never a time in American history where there was a generation that didn't think they were watching the world fall apart and that the end times were, happening right away, including the Church of God. If you go back to 1880 and 1890 in the Church of God, they were absolutely certain Jesus was coming back any day because, of course, things had never been worse. But we'll talk about that a little more in a second. So I want to talk about the three fears, though, that I see in the American church as I come back to visit America over and over. I come back, I hear Americans, my friends, my pastor friends, all my people I love here in America, and there are three fears that stand out to me. So cool and refreshing. The first is a fear of decline of Christianity. I hear all the time, oh, the U.S. was a Christian nation and now it's not, and we're abandoning the church, we're abandoning God's ways, and you know, what a dark day we have reached. Well, a few things about that. There is a defeatist attitude when we say that in America. You know, like we're losing this horrible war. I mean, there's a negative defeatist attitude, which then makes us hostile to the non-Christian world. So instead of being loving to the Christian world, instead of being a light, it brings out the worst in us, where we're defensive, where we're like, you're trying to take away what we are and we're going to fight you back. That doesn't really work well. The second thing I would say about that is that if you are confident in the Lord Jesus Christ and that this world is His, and that He has a greater kingdom plan, and that it is in His timeline, you shouldn't really be worrying about retractions in our popularity or churches closing or whatever. Is He the master of all time? Is the universe in His hands or not? You can't have it both ways. You can't pretend that God is the Lord of the universe and that the redemption story we read about in the Bible through Jesus Christ, who promises His return and fulfillment of the new kingdom, is going to be true, and then act all panicky when for a few years in, 2010 or 11, things aren't looking so good for us in America. Who cares? Who cares? The point is that the kingdom will not be denied. And that is the biblical truth. You know, throughout Christian history, people that loved Jesus and would lay down their life for Jesus were always a minority. There never was a golden age in the United States of a bunch of people saying, I love Jesus and I just want to carry that cross. Because carrying that cross is so fun. That was never a time in American history. Neither was it a time in Christian history. In fact, if you go back to the time of Luther and Calvin, supposedly the Protestant Reformation, this great moment of, Christianity and Christendom in Europe, they say only about 10% of the people even are committed to the faith. Only 10% in the time of Luther and Calvin. And when we read the New Testament, we see some heroes in there, but we see a lot of falling away. We see a lot of division. We see churches with problems. We even see churches that didn't last long. The church in Ephesus didn't last very long. It only lasted a few years. So we have it in our heads that like there were these golden eras when everybody just wanted to be just like Jesus. But that's not true. The people that love the Lord and are the salt of the earth have always been a minority, and we should not expect it to be any different today. And furthermore, the United States actually has had it much easier than most places. Okay, we have it very easy. I shared yesterday that in a lot of the countries where we work with, the percentage of evangelical Christians that know Jesus is 0.25%. 0.25%. You could have revival after revival after revival after revival and get to maybe 1% if you're lucky. We have churches like in Greece where if that church of 5 or 10 people, and it got down to about 5, luckily now we've turned it around and it's growing. If that church were to close, it's not like closing churches here in Tennessee. If that church had closed in Greece, we never would have gotten permission to ever open up a church again. That would have been it for the Church of God in the country of Greece. That was it. That's different than Tennessee. where you can close many churches and you're still going to have the freedom to start churches, have churches in your home, plant churches. You can do whatever. You merge church. You can do a million options. Where we work, a church goes down and it's over. So Zach and Audrey, for instance, they're only 28 years old now. Young, wonderful couple. They are working in the hardest neighborhood in England. Has high crime rate. Nobody has jobs. People don't get out of this community. Average age of first-time sex for teenagers is 8. People only have one parent, if that. It's a very hard neighborhood. In that neighborhood of 80,000 people, there are only 4 churches serving 80,000 people. Of those 4 churches, all of them have 10 people. So that's 40 people serving 80,000 people. And our church there has about 10 people. So why don't we close it? Well, like I said, we can't close it. We're going to need to do something to keep it alive. But second of all, here's the weird thing. There are no youth groups, and there are no young Christians in this neighborhood. There are not even young Christians that know anything about Jesus, except at our church. We've got a group of about 20 to 40 young people who come to the Church of God in Birkenhead, England. And we don't know why. We don't know why. Except that they know Zach and Audrey love them in a way their parents don't. They know that Zach and Audrey are the big sister and big brother that they've never had. And so these kids come. They don't even know how to act in church. They swear. They make rude gestures. They are so far from being socialized. But there is something in that church that gives them more meaning than they have ever had in their life. And so, while some people would say to us, well, that situation is so hopeless, you should never send missionaries to that location. And people told us that. And we said, no way. As long as there are young kids, and some of them are walking an hour to get to that little church, as long as there are kids searching the Lord, we're going to send this team of missionaries. And what is the most we can lose? Money? Yeah, we could lose money. We could lose quite a bit of money. Being embarrassed. The ministry didn't work out. Oh, yeah, we could be embarrassed about that. How big of a deal is that compared to reaching these kids with the kingdom? And so we cannot be dominated by the fear of the decline of Christianity. We have to find those people that are hurting, and we have to go and engage them no matter what the price. The second thing I see in churches all around America is a fear of taking risks. Churches, by their very nature, get comfortable. For the first 5 years, churches are innovative. Then they find their little groove. And then after 20 years, it's nearly impossible for them to make key strategic changes. They get so sedentary and caught in what they are and in their own identity and all their kind of values that they have and things that they don't want to change, that after 20 years it becomes very hard to change a church. But if you are willing to reinvent the DNA of your church, if you're willing to revision and reimagine the church, you can expand the life cycle of a church. And so we had this church in Paris that when I would go there, they meet in a 300-year-old Lutheran cathedral right in the heart of Paris, not just 5 minutes from Notre Dame Cathedral. They meet there, and on a Sunday when I would go, they had about 10 people. Well, that's pretty standard for a church in Europe, 10 people. Now, their church was actually bigger than that, but because people work on Sundays in France, there's more like 40 people in the church. But it is a small church. There's no doubt about it. Well, this church, once again, for a lot of Americans would look like a failure. What, you have 10 people on a Sunday? 40 people? Small church? What can you really do? And in Paris, a city of 9 million people, you guys are pathetic. You're in this giant sanctuary that seats 500 people, and you've got 10 people. Well, what a loser church. But this church refused to believe that God was done with them. And they said, what is it that we have that no other church has? Is it possible for a church of 10 people to be so special that it can do things that other churches cannot do? And what they realized is that they are the only church in Paris that speaks Arabic and French in their worship services. Arabic and French. Most of them are from Lebanon and Egypt, but they're very French now. They've been living there and immigrated there, and the children grew up there. And so they wondered, how many Christian evangelicals are there in Paris who could get together with us and form a little network? How many Bible-believing Arabic Christians are there in Paris? Well, if you know anything about Paris, and it's 9 million people, many of them are Muslims and Arabic speakers. So how many Christians are there out of 9 million? You know how many there were? 700. That's it. 700. So our little church there sent out invitations to 700 Arabic-speaking Christians to see if they could develop a network for ministry. And you know what happened? 500 showed up. And it filled the entire sanctuary of the cathedral. And out of that, they have started a network that teaches Sunday school to the children of immigrants whose parents may be Arabic speaking, but they're growing up speaking French. They also reached out to the Muslim community, and now they're launching mission efforts into North Africa. All of this from this little church. They now host our French retreat. They are doing miraculous things. They're becoming like a centerpiece of our ministry in Europe and the Middle East. In fact, we're launching new ministries in Europe and the Middle East, and the Paris church is now going to be the spearhead leaders of the ministry, and their leaders are all between the ages of 22 and 34. That is awesome. That is exciting, and it shows how size doesn't matter. It's whether you're willing to take risks and trust God. Now I want to talk about the third thing I see with American churches, and that is a fear of what is going on in the world. I mentioned ISIS. Tonight at 6, I'll be talking about ISIS and terrorism and why ISIS has emerged and what this means for the world. And I'll give you a great overview of the Middle East that I hope will help to make sense for everything that's happening in the Middle East. But anyway, there is a fear of everything happening in the world, and people in America are just afraid that the country is going to hell in a handbasket, that we're no longer a strong country, that terrorists are going to take us over, and the fears go on and on and on. Actually, if you're a Muslim in America, you are far, far more likely to receive a terrorist attack than a non-Muslim American. Most terror attacks in the United States are Americans that are not Muslims attacking Muslims. We don't hear about that too much, but that's the truth. And the vast majority of terrorist incidents in America are actually local homegrown groups doing terrorist acts against the government. Regardless of that, the vast majority of all terrorist attacks in the world are Muslim killing Muslim, and mainly in the countries of Pakistan and Iran and Syria and Yemen. So that is where 95% of all terrorist attacks occur, is in these 4 countries, and Afghanistan, 5 countries that are Muslim on Muslim. So what happens? Why are we so afraid? Well, one of the things that a lot of Americans don't realize is that our news media is losing ground to the internet. Very few people get their news anymore from television. And in fact, the average viewer of Fox News is 60 years or older. And it's really 60-year-old or older people that watch news on cable. Most people have switched over to the internet. So one of the things that the news channels realize is that there's a part of your brain that will stop you from multitasking if it gets afraid. So they know that most people are sitting there on their iPads with the TV on, or they're talking on their cell phone, or they're playing Angry Birds or whatever. And so it is a marketing ploy by the TV news networks to make every news story scary, because it gets a part of your brain to stop multitasking and doing other stuff and focus on the news. And that is why there's constant terror and fear on Fox News, and that is why CNN has breaking news every 2 seconds. I mean, every time, the president has a cup of coffee and it's breaking news. And I fall for it every time. I always have the news on in my home, and as soon as I hear that breaking news, I immediately drop everything, pay attention, and Hillary Clinton bought a cupcake or something. And that is what they are doing, because fear sells. The competition has gotten so extreme because of the internet and people abandoning cable that they need to scare you. But one of the things this does is it creates a sense of fear that we are persecuted as Americans, and particularly Christians. I hear a lot of American Christians who feel like they are persecuted. Well, Americans are not persecuted for their faith. When you hear some random story about some guy in Florida who didn't get a job because he was a Christian, or some school where they didn't let there be a prayer meeting, that is not persecution at all. It is offensive to our Christian brothers and sisters who are actually being persecuted to hear us complain about being persecuted in the United States. This is still a country with massive, massive freedom of religion. The other day, when these men in Egypt that were Christian were marched down to the ocean, they were beheaded on video. The ocean turned blood red. And what some people don't realize happened is that ISIS left on audio, and there were men that were being beheaded who were praising Jesus as they were being beheaded. That's persecution. And that is bravery. In North Korea, they'll go up to a 5-year-old little girl and they'll say, hey, the government officials will say, hey, does your father or mother keep a special book that they hide in your house? It's like a big book. Maybe it's black. It has a lot of stories in it. And the kids are taught, of course, to obey everybody from the government. And the kids will say, well, yes, we do have a special book that's hidden under our bed. So the government officials will go there. They'll find a Bible. And they will send not only the parents to prison camps, they'll send the little girl to prison camps, and they'll send the whole extended family to prison camps. Now that is Christian persecution. I had a missionary friend who was in Iraq, converted a young lady, 23 years old, to Christianity. She loved the Lord. She was so excited to be a Christian. 2 days later, her family threw her off a tall building. That's persecution. And let me tell you one other story about persecution. There was a pastor, a very young pastor, and his young wife who went around Nepal preaching the gospel, which is illegal. And the government there is very strict against preventing the spread of Christianity, and it is spreading all over. And so this young couple were out there preaching the gospel, and they got arrested, and they got put into prison. They got put into a jail cell that was very small, had 40 criminals in it, and no bathroom. No bathroom. And they had just had a small child. And so here they are walking in with their infant child. into a jail cell with criminals and no bathroom. And do you remember the feeling of having a newborn baby? I remember so vividly when Mark was born and bringing him home from the hospital, and the feeling of being so protective. And I would have the stroller, and my hands would be so tight, like, don't you dare touch the stroller. This is my precious baby. Can you imagine taking your newborn child into that filthy jail cell with those criminals? Well, you know what these Nepalese Christians did? They said, well, gee, thank heavens we're not like those American Christians who are really persecuted. No, they didn't say that at all. You know what they said? Well, it looks like we're going to be stuck in this jail cell for a long time, so you know what we need to do? We need to start a seminary. So they started a seminary. They started a Bible training college in their jail cell. They converted everyone in the jail cell, and then they converted the jail cell people, the jailers. And then the jailers let them go. And that was their response to persecution. Was, well, what else do we need to do for the Lord? Not woe is me, not, oh, look at all the power and influence we're losing. Their response was, okay, and how do we use this opportunity for the kingdom? It's deeply, deeply moving. We can't have a fear of what's going on in the world. This right here is a picture of Arab youth. These kids are between the ages of about 19 and 26. Oh, that's good. That's good. These kids speak 3 languages. They're Arabs. You don't hear about this in the news either. There are a lot of Arab Christians. They are Arab Christians, just like your young people here, just a little bit older than most of them, speak 3 or 4 languages, fluent in English, and their country is being completely taken over by Muslims. Lebanon is very, very small, much, much smaller than Tennessee. It's probably the size of a fourth of Tennessee. If that, I think it could be a fifth of Tennessee. It is a very small country. It has 4 million people, and it has 1 million refugees fleeing ISIS in Syria that have inundated the country. So 1 million out of 4 million. And the UN is projecting another 2 million in the next 24 months. So the country is literally being flooded by people running from ISIS and people running from Al-Qaeda and the collapse of Iraq. And many of these people are going to be militant Muslims. And it's going to create a Muslim majority in Lebanon, which is going to be horrifically dangerous to the Christians. So the future of these young people's country, it's pretty much finished. I don't know how Lebanon is going to survive. I don't know how these sharp, awesome, super kids have a future, because their country is literally falling apart. It's kind of like if the United States suddenly received 90 million Muslim immigrants. 90 million Muslim immigrants. Imagine that. How do you think Americans would react to that? In fact, we just had some Central American kids that tried to immigrate across the border, and the numbers were not that large, and Americans completely freaked out. These were kids that were 15 years and under. Chances of them being killed, they can't even go to school because the violence is so bad in Honduras, for instance. They have a 1 in 15 chance of dying. So these kids were escaping to get out of a world where kids can't even go outside anymore. And the reaction of the United States was one of self-protectionism and panic. Now, if only 2 families in every county of the United States had taken in 2 of those Central American kids, the crisis would have been over. All we needed was 2 Christian families in each county in the United States to say, we'll take those young refugees in. Now, my point in this story is that I'm concerned when, as Christians, our number one reaction to problems in the world is, how is this going to hurt me? What do I need to do to protect my finances? What do I need to protect my ethnicity? That contrasts greatly with the response of the people in prison in Nepal and these teenagers and young people in Lebanon. Their first response is, well, what does this mean for the kingdom? Not what does this mean for Lebanon? What happens to my job prospects when all these Muslims come in? What if they kill me? Their first reaction is, well, what on earth does God want us to do right now as the church? And I think that that is what I'm talking about, that we as the American church, who have so many resources, we are the wealthiest. We are like a $1 trillion economy in and of ourselves, American Christians. When we have so many resources and facilities, we have got to not be people who are dominated by these three fears. So let's re-examine our fears quickly, and then I'll finish. The first is that Christianity is in decline in the United States. Well, yes, that is absolutely true. But here's what you need to know. Around the world, Christianity is absolutely exploding. We have never seen Christianity get into as many countries and cultures as we are today. And by the way, we have never in the history of Islam seen more Muslims convert to Christ than is what is happening today, since September 11th. Another thing is that America has a pattern of waning religious belief. We go through periods of decline, then we go through periods of higher belief. It's a cycle that we go through all the time. And we just came out of a cycle where it looked like people were very Christian in America, and now we are in a cycle where it looks like we are not. Do you know what period of American history had the least religious belief and church going? Which period of American history had the least church belief and church going? It was the time of the Founding Fathers, 1776. We don't know our religious history very well. We have myths and ideas about it, but we don't know it very well. What tends to happen in the United States is the United States is one of the few countries that gets really into religion and Christian institutions when we're making lots of money. When we're making lots of money and things are going good and the economy is great, that is when we care about God. We are a people that when the economy goes down and we enter into crisis like World War II or the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, or right now since September 11th and the economic bust, when we go into crisis, we kind of give up on religion and faith. Interesting, isn't it? And in fact, when you look at the rise of the megachurches, when did that happen? When the economy rebounded in 1991, 92. It was the Clinton administration. I don't care about politics. That's not what I'm talking about. From 92, we went out of a recession. We had this huge bubble. And it was in 1993 that Bill Hybels was on the cover of Christianity Today talking about the megachurch, which was not even a term we were using back then. And sure enough, seminaries and Bible colleges and churches did great through the 90s, and they went into steep decline after September 11th as the crisis time arrived. So this is a cyclical thing, and we don't need to panic. We don't need to panic. But this will last a generation. Okay, this generation is not going to be very religious in America. However, we don't need to care that much, because what needs to happen during this period is that we refine our churches, that we get our house in order, that we stop dividing, that we stop fighting with each other, that we start showing communities we live in that we care with no strings attached, that we do the things that people don't expect us to do. This is a time for purification. If anything, when Americans feel like religion is doing great, we get more and more superficial in our faith. And it makes perfect sense. We don't handle materialism well. Jesus said that. The story of the rich young ruler, Jesus wasn't being a jerk. He wasn't just being like, get out of here, you're not into this. The point he was making was there is a power in materialism. There is a power in security, and it'll lead you away from me. And you can't have both. And that's very much where the American church is. We don't do well when we're rolling in the money. And this is our time now for a period of refinement. You know what else? The world has never been more peaceful than it is today. Not even close. Today, the life expectancies are higher than they've ever been. Child mortality rates are lower. The average person is far wealthier. We now have people in absolute poverty under 1 billion for the first time in history. Nothing like that has even remotely been achieved. People live safer, healthier, wealthier lives than ever in history. That's what my second book is about, Faith in the Future, which is out there if you're interested in that. This is not the worst time in the world. This is not the most apocalyptic time we've ever lived in. It's the exact opposite. In Christian Europe, 1/3 of the whole population was killed because of disease and war. In medieval times were 40 times more violent than the world is today. We've never seen less wars than we have seen right now, places like Africa and Asia. And in fact, for most of history, we lived in tribes that were extremely violent because that is the only way that you survived. One of the reasons you see so much violence in the Old Testament is because that's how the planet was. It was small tribes of violent people having to kill people for resources. You know, we didn't live in an age of countries and welfare states and technology and science. And so we completely overestimate how dangerous the world is. Now, are there threats? Yes. Do we have to take these threats seriously? Yes. If all the bad things that the news tells us about were to happen tomorrow, would we be living in the worst time in history? No. Not even close. Not even close. And furthermore, as Christians, why do we expect the world to be this peaceful, happy place? Why do we expect Jesus to give us every desire of our heart? That's not what happened to the disciples. That's not what happened to Paul. They suffered. They didn't get their dreams entirely to come true. Paul never got to go to Spain, okay? Because you know what? They were little tiny pieces of a bigger narrative that God was creating. And that's what we are. And one of the problems, we may have some Joel Osteen fans here, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Joel Osteen. I feel like that's the gospel of America, not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because one of the big lessons we need to learn as Christians, if we're going to mature, is that it is not about you. It is not about you. And it is okay for you to be a very, very small, tiny actor in the drama that God is unfolding in the universe. And there's only one star to this drama, and it's Jesus Christ. The rest of us are servants, and we are servants as a body of Christ. Not as you as your feelings, not in you as your dreams that you want to come true. It's not about your best life now. It's absolutely not about your best life now. It's about the kingdom expanding and being completely in the hands of Christ. And that is who we are. And so these difficult times, we cannot be dominated by fear. We have to be dominated by confidence and assurance that we have the privilege of being part of a bigger act in the world. So the next time you see ISIS, don't sit there and go, I'm afraid, and I'm afraid of them coming to America. I want you to sit there and think about those guys getting their heads cut off and praising Jesus as the knife goes through. Because that's who's going to win in the end. they are going to win because they are with the Lord Jesus Christ, and so are we. Amen.